I would say that what Diana said, I don't see a separation between theory and practice, or even the complexity of policy which Brian raised. I think in romantic ideal terms, it's not always what happens, but it's not also always idealistic and romantic, because we, Walkyria and myself, I think that's why you're asking the question, we contributed to policy as well. So in the same relationship, that the presupposition that there is a separation between theory and practice, there's normally a presupposition that there's a separation between policy and practice. Right? Ideally, policy should be a reflection of practice, should start off from a reflection of practice in order to change that practice, right? Or to make prescriptions for the practice. And theory, as Diana said, and I remind you of the old work of the much maligned Bourdieu, when he said that theory is nothing more than a reflection on practice. Right? So without practice, theory couldn't exist, and vice versa. Right? But it's important, as Diana said, to be aware that theory is a reflection of practice, and to be aware that when you think you're just doing practice, if you have an aversion to theory and you think you're not using theory, it's important to know that you are using theory, but worse still, without being critically aware of it, you're using theory in the worst sense possible. Right? So that it's important to be aware of this complexity. And we have, you're all familiar with the national curriculum proposal that we made, which was based on practice, on what we knew about what was going on and what could go on, the problems, and how we could make practice even better. Now, coming back to William's comments of despair, William, I'm not sure if this is different to what I'm going to give you a greater motive for despair, apparently, because I'm going to say this comment would have been the same. It would have been made 30 years ago, right? When we, Walkyria and myself, she was just born, of course. When we began working in the area with teachers and materials and whatever, producing teaching materials, this was in the dictatorship when people were taught, when it was we weren't allowed to teach reading, let alone critical reading, because it was considered to be subversive, right? So very few of you here in the audience would remember this, that reading was not encouraged during the dictatorship, right? And in the 1980s, there was a whole move post-dictatorship to teach reading again, to recuperate the teaching of reading. So there's always, I think it's part of our teaching profession, despair is important because it makes us critically aware of our restrictions, and how we should try to look for solutions constantly, to dialogue with them, and otherwise, if we're going to fall into that consumption concept of teaching, which is also what Brian touched on. What's the next best methodology? What's the most recent? Let's go to the supermarket of methodologies and take the latest item off the bookshelf. Then we're happy because we're happy consuming, right? Shop till you drop. We could do that with methodologies, right? So I think despair is important for us as researchers, as critical thinkers. It makes us aware that the world isn't a bed of roses, right? And this is why this is the origin of our project, right? I think that's why Danielle has raised the question in the first place. We're concerned here with connecting theory and practice. This also reflects our two personal interests, Walkyria's and myself. Walkyria is always connected to education, teacher education, and my image is to be up in the air with theory. Not so. But this is so we've always been working together complementarily in this. And as Diana mentioned also, this idea of multi-site ethnographies. This is a criticism I have been making of the new literacy studies for a long time, is that it's important to emphasize the local, yes, but when we're looking at the local, we have to be aware that we're looking at the local from another local, right? And this other local has provided us with all the categories with which we are currently seeing this local which we are researching. And we have to be critically aware of that. That's why I think it's important to talk about critical literacy when you're doing ethnographic practice in the local. Not to be critically aware of what's happening in what you are seeing, but to be critically aware of what you think you are seeing. Right? And multi-site ethnographies, which is what the project is all about, looking at what's happening in different situations, is extremely important. To avoid producing a new theory, a new methodology which will work all over the country. And you're all aware that this is what the curricular proposal is. It's not proposing anything in actual practice. It's proposing a reflection. Right? That's the spirit of curricular proposal. So wherever you are, take into account what your limitations are, what your possibilities are, and then act, rather than saying, here is a prescription for action. So that's the way we relate theory to practice, and our reaction to despair, which is important. Otherwise we would always, it's despair which generates hope. I think there's this dialogical connection between despair and hope. We can't simply rely on hope, and we can't simply rely on despair, but hope moves us to action.
Okay. I think I also want to answer or to have a comment on what you said before answering to Daniel's question. You know, this is an interesting issue, I think, that the one that you raised, William. What I feel is this is the kind of thing that we've been having for quite a long time. Let's say, long time ago, when I was an undergraduate, people would also feel the same despair. And I would say that some of the girls were sad to be at the university for waiting for their husband. Let me complement this information. You see, they wanted to see no school at all. You see, they wanted to find a mate. That was different. Lots of reasons I think that people had for not going to public schools. But I think that we would have some 2 hours for discussing this issue that led people not to believe in state schools, public schools, in education, you see. And it has a lot to do with the concept of what a teacher should be, and the acceptance of a teacher in a society like ours, and lots of things like that, right? But I think that you have a scenario that is telling you something. And in my view, this is the kind of scenario that should invite us to reinterpretation. So what is another way for me to read it? What is happening that makes people feel this way? So are people happy with theory and practice and so on and so on? What else can we think about it? So if people want to think, because for me, then I connect now to Daniel's question about changes. If we already see changes, what we've been doing for some time now, I think it takes time for things to change, for anything to change. So, but our concern is to promote opportunities for people to change, if they like. Because I cannot impose changes on people. I cannot impose changes if people do not want to change. You see, this has to do with the concept of emancipation for me. I read a lot about emancipation in education as if we had the obligation to emancipate someone. I don't think we have this role of emancipating. We have the role of promoting this kind of discussion and making them think about it, and they choose whether they want to be what is something that we would consider emancipation. You see, it's a very complex situation, right, in this sense, but I think we've started seeing some changes in those that want to make changes. If this answers something. Okay.